All right, Letty, we'll put this first question to you. Can you tell us a little bit more about your company, the technology, and the importance and tie-in to software quality?
Yeah, sure. So I work at PathAI, and the Path is for pathology. And so nowadays there are these targeted drugs for cancer treatment, where a pathologist would look at a glass slide and several million cells and have maybe 15 minutes to look at those. So in actual practice, they look at a few hundred cells, and they're expected to tell you whether or not you have cancer, but also whether your tumor cells, for example, are at 6% expression for a particular protein, or they're closer to 8. And if they're closer to 8, then you might get this really novel drug that could extend your life. And if they're closer to 6, you won't get the drug. So, the human eye really can't measure 6 to 8% of tumor cells within that length of time. So what we're doing at PathAI is we're training models to look at several millions of cells. And, it'll take like maybe half a minute to look at several million cells and tell you with a 99% accuracy exactly what your tumor expression is. So that's what we're doing at PathAI, and it's a super exciting topic that's very near and dear to me, having lost a parent to cancer. And so it's super exciting for me to be working in software that could actually change the face of medicine.
Awesome, thanks a lot, Letty. Sam, can I put the same question to you? Can you share some more about your company, the technology, and the importance and tie-in to software quality?
Sure. So I work at Caption Health, and we're a startup in the San Francisco Bay Area. And our mission is all around making medical imaging more accessible. And so performing ultrasound is a complex skill that requires years to master. I don't know if any of you have either had an echo performed or have tried doing it yourself, but it is very tricky and requires specialized training. And so what we did was we trained AI models to emulate the expertise of sonographers and physicians to understand the quality of an image, and also what motions or movements of the transducer are needed to get to that optimal position to see the right slice of the heart, if you will. And it's an interesting problem because it's a real-time AI, so it's functioning in real time alongside the user to augment their abilities and act as sort of a co-pilot to the ultrasound exam. And so our flagship software, Caption Guidance, think of it as Google Maps for ultrasound. There's turn-by-turn guidance. It tells you when you've gotten to your destination. And that product received breakthrough designation from the FDA in 2018. And we received de novo authorization earlier this year in February after conducting a large pivotal study demonstrating the effectiveness when used by nurses with no prior ultrasound experience. We also have some software products that interpret the images that are acquired. For example, we have an ejection fraction measurement algorithm that an ejection fraction basically measures the amount of blood pumped out of your heart with each heartbeat, and is the most widely used measurement of cardiac health and well-being. And in terms of software quality, I mean, our product is software, and so software quality is really everything. I think the things that I like to focus on in leading this group is building a quality management system that can encompass both deep learning research, which tends to be a lot more researchy, and also kind of the sprintly software development that is pretty standard in the industry, and also to make it accessible to a team, many of whom don't have a medical device background. A lot of software developers do not, and so helping them understand the different aspects and why they're important is a key focus of mine.
That's great, thanks, Sam. And can we go a little bit deeper on that and maybe talk about why software quality is increasingly important in today's digital age? And maybe what's any changes that you see that are happening in a broader context that makes this issue of software quality such an important one?
Yeah, definitely. So in 2011, the famous Silicon Valley investor Mark Andreessen published an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal in which he famously said, "Software is eating the world." And it was really prescient because software has eaten the world in the past 10 years. Think about all the software you interact with on a daily basis. Think of the most valuable companies in the world are largely software. And those of us in the medical device industry, software is everywhere. If it's not embedded in hardware devices, it is the device itself. And if it's not in the device itself, it's being used in the manufacturing and control of the product's quality. So software is really everywhere. And I think that's obviously a key aspect here. There's an article that came out last year in Forbes in which some researchers said software ate the world and now AI is eating software. And I really think that's the next wave here is AI is going to be absolutely everywhere. We're starting to see some of the early devices Letty's company and my company are two examples that are somewhat different in terms of what AI can do. They can either outperform a visual inspection or the way that it's being done now, or it can be a co-pilot or work alongside a physician. And there's a lot of different ways that it can be useful, but it is coming. And it poses some unique questions for quality management. How do you control a device that can modify itself? How do you do a design review for an algorithm that's a black box and you don't actually know how it's making these decisions? And the adaptive AI is really what's coming next. It's AI that can modify itself in the field based on new information. And then quality and design control becomes something that isn't just within the walls of your office, but it's something that you have to build into the product itself. And that's a really exciting thing that us in the quality industry are going to have to face, is quality becoming part of design. And I think that's a really exciting opportunity for companies that are ahead of the curve on this.
That was great, Sam. Thank you. On the QMS, maybe Letty, we'll put this question to you. You built a quality management system for your organization really from the ground up. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, this was my third time doing it, because you're able to put things in the way you want them. You're not modifying anything that, any kind of bad habits that were built in before. You're able to put it in the way you envision it. And the part I really love about early stage QMSs is that you can make them the least burdensome QMS that you can actually get value from. So what we did is I brought in an EQMS, so a system that would handle document control and employee training and CAPAs and all those things that I didn't want to have to chase manually. And I just started writing and releasing like the quality manual and SOPs and putting together a plan for 1345 certification, as well as MDSAP for the United States, so for Part 820. So we did that. We did that, and it took about 6 months. So I've done it. This was my third one, but this was definitely the fastest one, and always a good time.
Fantastic. I'm sure there were challenges along the way. Maybe we can get to those in a little bit if we have an opportunity. Sam, I'm going to put this to you. You worked as an FDA reviewer prior to coming into your role at Caption Health. I have to wonder, did that give you a unique perspective as a leader within an emerging organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I joined FDA after undergrad. I graduated from WashU in St. Louis with a biomedical engineering degree, and really is unparalleled in terms of the amount of exposure I was able to get for the whole medical device pathway, from early stage first in human trials to post-market compliance issues, kind of seeing the whole process under the hood, if you will, at many different companies. And I think from a quality perspective in particular, it allowed me to see what makes high-performing companies high-performing in terms of quality, and what creates challenges in other companies. What are the shared qualities where companies perhaps underperform or get themselves into trouble? And that's been really helpful. I think the key thing there is a culture of quality in which the staff aren't afraid to report issues. A lot of times companies create a culture of fear in which employees will actively hide issues or try not to report them for fear of retribution. And I think that's one thing I've tried to instill at my company is, look, tell us about the issue. Quality is about becoming better and continuously improving. It's not about having the perfect product the first time.
Any particular areas of software quality that has impacted your regulatory strategy, would you say?
Yeah, so AI is pretty new, and FDA has been very proactive in terms of how they hope to regulate this area of software and medical device regulation. And they released a discussion paper last April about AI and machine learning-based software as a medical device and how they intend to review it. And one concept that they had there was something that they called a predetermined change control plan, which I call PCCP for short, which isn't the most catchy acronym, but it's basically a pre-review of types of changes that a company wishes to make to their product in the future, and the methods by which they would make sure that the product continues to meet its design requirements or its specifications. And it allows FDA to say, okay, your device can change in the following ways, provided these conditions are met, and we don't need to re-review it. And so what that does is it allows you to really embrace what makes AI special. If you train on more data, the product can get better without much intervention from the company. And you can roll out those improvements to patients without waiting 3 months for a 510K clearance. And so FDA's embraced this proactive approach of pre-reviewing future changes. And that's something that was part of our de novo when we recently received a new 510K with a modified version of a PCCP that allows us to make changes to our algorithms of a particular kind, provided certain testing is done and we meet our acceptance criteria, but it gives us a lot of flexibility. And so I think that's the most interesting thing way in which software quality is affecting our company's regulatory strategy, because we're basically putting controls in place around AI design and validation, and then FDA is reviewing them as part of their design review in a 510K. And I recently wrote an article for this in Stat News talking about how this could be applied to adaptive AI. Essentially, you create a PCCP for a product in which you build in the testing into the product itself, and FDA reviews that.
That's fantastic. A lot of positive momentum for you and Caption Health, and I think that regulatory strategy piece, companies who are emerging will be listening to that, absolutely. Letty, let's put this question over to you. Let's talk about your QMS, and can you share the biggest challenge that you had in software quality related to your QMS, and how did you overcome some of those challenges?
Yeah, so Sam touched on it earlier when he was talking about having a base of engineers who didn't necessarily understand or know medical devices. And that has been the biggest challenge for me at PathAI, mainly because we hire incredibly brilliant engineers, but they don't really understand the rationale for needing to do things or to document things. So maybe they worked at another company that, we have some people who worked, for example, at TripAdvisor, right? So turning software over, the likelihood of harm is none, right? And then you bring them in to make a medical device where you're actually considering, okay, if the software fails, this could actually hurt someone, right? So it's always bringing them back around to understand, okay, this is not scheduling a cruise. You're actually creating software that's going to be used to determine the treatment plan for a patient, and depending on that treatment, maybe someone lives another year, maybe they don't. So it's kind of bringing that rationale and that thought process to them so that they understand, okay, I need to document this not just because it's a good practice and because it's required, but also because in 5 years, when we're trying to figure out why we did things a certain way, we need to remember, and we're not always going to be in the same exact job, and we need to remember and be able to defend it. So that's been our biggest challenge. So I've been trying to make it kind of a part of the way that we work, and trying to appeal to the demographic of the engineers. And I think I told you about this once before, John, that I posted the quality policy in the bathrooms, and that got people's attentions. I put cartoons in the quality policy, and then I actually created like a poster that looked like it was a party invitation, and it had cupcakes on it, and it was the quality policy. So just drawing people in to read the quality policy, because otherwise, maybe it wouldn't have gotten too much attention.
Getting people's attention is not an easy thing these days, right? Not an easy thing.
Yeah, and then balancing that need for speed and getting to market with, what's the risk, and trying to make a risk-based decision in all cases.
That's fantastic. All right, so we are now going to go to the questions from our participants, and it's a great transition into the risk conversation. Letty, we'll put this first one to you. What are your thoughts on software as a service, SaaS, and cloud-based product tool validations, and the need for continuous validation?
Yeah, and so that is a great lead in from risk, right? Because maybe it doesn't require revalidation. Maybe it requires an assessment. So is this a change that requires revalidation or not? Maybe the change, whatever it is, doesn't even touch your intended uses. Or maybe it's a bug fix that you really do want to implement prior to validating, and you write a rationale for why, and then you revalidate at the next major upgrade, or it could be that you do drop everything and revalidate right away. It kind of depends on what the change is.
That's great. Sam, we'll put this next one over to you. What are some best practices for managing agile development in an iterative process, while also updating your documents and creating an audit trail?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's one that we grapple with at Caption as we grow. I think there's maybe a misconception about Agile as easier or in some ways favorable to waterfall in all cases. And I think that the big misconception is that, waterfall in cases, especially for an early stage company, might be preferable because you're creating these phase gates. You don't move to design outputs until the whole team is set on the design inputs, and you sit together and you review them and you make sure all the documents are there. It's slower, but if you don't have a very repeatable process in your company, it's actually a good way of going about it. In Agile, the process really becomes the documentation. And if you don't have a mature process, then you're going to potentially just remove the only kind of semblance of quality in the company too early. So one thing that we've done is we've moved from waterfall to Agile as we build systems that work together, and you go from requirements to release with interoperable systems in which the process becomes the documentation. So I would say that Agile is not always better, even with software as a medical device. It really depends on how well you can stitch together your development in a way that you're keeping track of things that are going on. But the advantages are huge. So it is somewhere that I think you should be trying to get, but you really want to make sure that the process is producing documentation, that it's controlled, and that you don't have to do all this documentation before a phase review or at the very end, which takes up a lot of time and is frustrating. The last thing I would say on that is have the developers come up with the solutions. They already use systems or have in the past at previous roles that lend themselves well to this type of agile process. GitHub and Jira, work with the tools they have, and they'll be much more likely to come along with you on this journey of implementing higher quality standards.
Excellent. If you're just joining us on the meeting, we were going through questions that were submitted by our audience, our registrants. So Letty, this next one is to you. Can you comment on the balance between efficiency and effectiveness for documentation in a software as a medical device environment?
Yeah, so this is this is another one of those risk questions, right? You could document yourself into the ground and not be efficient, but it doesn't always make sense to do it, especially if the thing that you're documenting is sufficiently addressed in other areas. And then there are things that you do want to really take some time to document, like your risk management plan and your risk management report, right? Because that's where you're explaining your rationale around risk. So yeah, it is a balancing act, but you do have to just put the risk in there and do the benefit risk analysis.
Letty, we'll put this next one to you. Do you recommend distinct hardware and software development lifecycle procedures within your QMS?
I do, primarily because, like Sam was saying, Agile is so great for software development. It doesn't really translate to hardware development, right? You're not going to really implement an Agile process for hardware outside of R&D. Maybe your R&D is Agile because you're like, oh, I'll try this. But on the software side, it's definitely beneficial to have either a totally Agile software development lifecycle or a hybrid Agile. Maybe you have some iterations in there for requirements, and then you lock it down and you do your V&V. So yeah, we do have separate documents for design and development for software and hardware.
That's great, thank you. This was a big question from one of our registrants, and Letty, I'll put it to you first, and Sam, you can comment on it as well. I'd love to hear both of your thoughts, but can you speak to the intersection of cybersecurity, risk, and software quality?
Yeah, and I would actually add usability,
Mm-hmm.
right? You have usability risks, especially for SAMD. You have some very real usability risks. And so we throw them all into one pot because they're all risks. And we look at each item in terms of its cyber risk or its usability risk or its software failure risk. So yeah, they're all walking in lockstep with each other.
Any thoughts on that, Sam?
Yeah, I totally agree with Letty. Usability is a big part of Caption Health's products. I like to joke that it is a usability product. So I would agree to add that to the list. Cybersecurity, I think, is one that is really interesting and is becoming increasingly important with connected devices. This is something I have experience with at the FDA. I was part of a group that helped manage the first recall of an implanted device for cybersecurity related reasons, which got a lot of press attention. Really the key thing to remember for cybersecurity, I think, is if I could have one takeaway for cybersecurity for those in quality, is that probability of occurrence doesn't really work. You can't really estimate how frequently someone's going to hack into a device. And so really you need to use a framework of exploitability. How vulnerable is the system to being exploited by an intruder or hacker, any sort of vulnerabilities there. So the FDA has really taken the lead on this and has been very proactive. So there's a lot of resources there for you on cybersecurity, but that's really the key thing, because we hear things when I was at FDA, we would hear things all the time from physicians saying, well, there's like a 1 in a million chance of this pacemaker being hacked. And we say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like that's just it's not based on anything, and it doesn't make sense to describe it in that way. So that's my key takeaway for that topic.
That's fantastic. Great insight. Letty, we're gonna go to you a couple questions around IEC 62304, which seems to be the de facto standard for med device software. Can you talk to any other standards and potential for 82304 for SAMD?
Yeah, love 6304. Love it, love it, love it. Especially the 2015 allowances for legacy software. I worked at a place that needed to update the CE mark, and we needed to do, this is not PathAI, and we needed to get a new CE mark to 62304 prior to 2015. So I was creating a software development plan for software that was developed 20 years prior, and the developer had died. So like the changes to 62304 that allow for legacy software, I'm a big fan, but 82304 is also awesome. So I love when standards actually make sense and they provide value. And 82304 has some really good guidance on instructions for use, which, they totally make sense. They're things that we should definitely consider. And I really enjoy having them in a standard so that I don't have to think of them myself, right? I can just say, oh, okay, well, 82304 requires these things to be in an IFU, which are things that were in our IFU anyway. Right, they were going to be in our IFU anyway, but having that standard is fantastic, and that's the biggest thing that I appreciate out of 82304. But I also love you can't see them, but they're TIR 45 and TIR 36. So 36 is for validation of software for regulated processes. Love it, love it. It is heavily bookmarked and dog-eared. Here's my little post-it. And TIR 45, which is the guidance on the use of Agile practices in the development of medical device software. So this is an excellent standard, and it really does walk you through how to apply Agile to design control and how to merge it with 62304. How they do work together. I think I've been through inspections where even for software, the inspector asks for design inputs, design outputs, and so you're trying to cram this weird software process into something that looks like design inputs and design outputs. And this standard really does help you understand how, what bucket things are in, especially because Agile makes it feel like your inputs and your outputs are kind of churned together.
Great. That's great. Thank you. Okay, Letty, let's talk on the subject of software development defects and risk management there. Any best practices you can share for tracking software defects and risk associated?
So yeah, for software defects, we track them using, it would be similar to a hashtag. It's just a label within our requirements management software so that we can easily find them all. And we do the same for items that come out of risk management. So any requirements that are risk mitigations, we just slap that hashtag on that it's a risk mitigation. And that seems to work fairly well. I think the tricky part is having the traceability, right? Because there's not a really elegant way to implement traceability. You either have this humongous Excel spreadsheet that some poor soul has to maintain, or you're constantly chasing stuff down, right? So we're looking at an electronic tool called Matrix Requirements, cleverly named. And so it's kind of pricey, but it does integrate with a lot of requirements management software. So like GitLab, GitHub, Jira, it will integrate with it. And you can flag things as risk mitigations or as a software defect or a bug. And so that will allow us to have the traceability, but also to have real more visibility of the whole V&V process, because we're going to have, everything flagged in an easy way without having to chase it manually.
Sure. I mean, I would also like to give a shout out to Matrix Requirements. We use that for our requirements management, and it's a really great company. They have a lot of good customer support, and we've had a lot of success using them to manage our requirements. We started out managing them in an Excel spreadsheet, and then having to manually kind of implement them into testing, and it was very Word document based. And so this allows us to have unique identifiers for requirements and keep track of changes as the company grows. I think that kind of segues well into this question, which would be about startup implementing quality best practices. I think I would my biggest recommendation would be don't try to build everything at once. So it's okay to start simple. I would definitely recommend starting with the key development focused SOPs. So you don't want to implement like a complaint handling SOP 2 years before you're going to have any complaints. It's just a waste of time. The training will be forgotten. So I would start with, design control, document control, change control, risk analysis, kind of these core ones, and then work on teaching your staff about why they exist and how to incorporate them. It's okay to start with Word documents and Excel, depending on the complexity of your product. There are a lot of tools being developed that try to help small companies implement design controls, and I would recommend looking at those depending on how fast you're growing or what the complexity of the product is. There's a balance between being handheld a little bit and also flexibility, and each company has to figure out what the right balance is for them. We tend to use kind of more free-form tools that have a lot of customizability, but with that you need more expertise and a lot more time building them and getting them set up. So it really depends on what you're building. But definitely don't try to build, Rome wasn't built in a day, and your quality management system won't be either.
Do we need to validate every update to SVC tools?
No. Next question. No, I'm just
Okay.
kidding. No, you do need to assess the changes, right? And you need to have a plan for the changes. So, I'll give you an example. GitLab gets upgraded every, I think, 23rd of the month. And it's just impossible to keep up with every single month's upgrades. And they kind of enforce them on you. Like you can block them, but only for a certain period of time. So what we do is we look at what the change is and how it affects our intended use and just make an assessment. So write a rationale for why you do or don't need to revalidate. You could really go into the weeds and say your operating system gets updated often. So do you need to revalidate that at that point if your operating system is actually one of your control tools? And so it's just taking that risk-based approach and applying it to software tool validation.
That's great. Thank you. Sam, have you seen any software quality trend changes due to COVID?
So I think there are some things I could point to. We've had an interesting experience at Caption AI because our Caption guidance product, as soon as COVID hit in March, we started to get requests from hospitals to incorporate our product because it allowed the folks who were in the isolation wards to scan without bringing in sonographers from other parts of the hospital. So you were preserving PPE and also allowing these equipment to stay in these units where they're trying to isolate COVID patients. And so we worked with FDA and we got a clearance for an update that was designed to make the product more useful at the point of care in only 25 days. It's like 99th percentile plus of speed to review. So FDA has just been incredible during this pandemic, really stepping up to the challenge of COVID-19. In terms of software quality specifically, I think the key thing is paperless. If you don't have a paperless QMS before this, I hope you do now. And I do think that some of the changes around audits being fully remote may stick around permanently. I mean, it's just so much more affordable for the notified bodies and for any other types of auditors, and all of our systems are online. So I think that's something that I think could stay past the pandemic potentially, depending on what kind of products you have and how much manufacturing there is and everything else. But I think some of those digital trends might stay.
That's great. Thanks. And Sam, maybe you can lead off on this one, and Letty, feel free to add in anything if you like. This comes from the audience as well. How can one best plan a career in software quality, and how can one take advantage of the new technology trends, AI, Internet of Things, what have you?
Yeah, I mean, I think just get your hands dirty and join a company. I think the smaller it is, the more responsibility you'll have and the more problems you'll have to solve. And so I do recommend, if you're up to the challenge of joining a smaller company, you'll have you won't be pigeonholed, and there'll be a lot of things to figure out. And I think that's really the best experience you can get. And software quality in medical devices is in such high demand right now.
I want to thank Sam and Letty for all your insight, for sharing so many good thoughts today. So we're wrapping up here. We want to do this again. Keep a lookout for a follow-up communication from us. We're thinking maybe shortly after the new year. We want to hear any great ideas you all have on how we can continue to maximize learning. If you haven't done so already, follow Agile Search on LinkedIn. Connect with Kathy and I. We're always here to answer your questions. And thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Letty. Thanks, Sam.
I think so.